Hello there. Thank you for joining us for another televised special of Powerful Poetry. I'm your host, Mrs. Cicela. Today, we will be examining the Anglo-Saxon epic poem, Beowulf. This poem is originally written in Old English and is over 4,000 lines long, so we will be reading a translated and abridged version of the text. The beginning of the poem tells of the Danish king, Hrothgar, who gains great fame and fortune through his battles. He decides to build a mead hall named Heorot for his people. What is a mead hall, you may ask? Mead was their version of an alcoholic beverage made of water, yeast, honey, and malt. That means Heorot was meant for a place of celebration and parties, and not the triple P kind. Follow along as we read the poem and answer the questions that correspond in your packet. Our poem starts as Heorot is being built, although fate has the monster Grendel in store for the Danes.
Then Hrothgar, taking the throne, led the Danes to such glory that comrades and kinsmen swore by his sword, and young men swelled his armies, and he thought of greatness, and resolved to build a hall that would hold his mighty band and reach higher toward heaven than anything that had ever been known to the sons of men. And in that hall he'd divide the spoils of their victories, to old and young what they'd earned in battle, but leaving the common pastures untouched and taking no lives. So here we have King of the Danes, King Hrothgar, who is a very generous and good king. He builds a place called Heorot, which we learned in the introduction is a mead hall or a banquet hall for his people. Number 1 in your packet asks you, why does Hrothgar build Heorot? And we've already learned the answer to this question from all that we've read so far. Hrothgar builds Heorot as a place to celebrate with his people, share his wealth, and come together as a community. So that's what you can write for the answer to number 1. He'd share the spoils of their victories, a place of peace and community, a symbol of the relationship between king and his people. The work was ordered, the timbers tied and shaped by the hosts that Hrothgar ruled. It was quickly ready, that most beautiful of dwellings, built as he'd wanted, and then he whose word was obeyed all over the earth named it Heorot. His boast come true, he commanded a banquet, opened out his treasure-full hands. That towering place, gabled and huge, stood waiting for time to pass, for war to begin, for flames to leap as high as the feud would light them, and for Heorot to burn. A powerful monster, living down in the darkness, growled in pain, impatient as day after day the music rang loud in that hall.
Hey viewers, so we've just had our first meeting with the demon monster Grendel. We are also about to get our very first of the Christianity sprinkles that Mrs. Cicela told you about in Beowulf. Grendel can hear the parties going on in Heorot, and they're about to spend the next few lines telling you about the songs that he hears that talk about God.
The harp's rejoicing call and the poet's clear songs, sung of the ancient beginnings of us all, recalling the Almighty, making the earth, shaping these beautiful plains marked off by oceans, then proudly setting the sun and moon to glow across the land and light it. The corners of the earth were made lovely with trees, and leaves made quick with life, with each of the nations, who now move on its face. And then, as now, warriors sang of their pleasure. So Hrothgar's men lived happy in his hall, till the monster stirred, that demon, that fiend Grendel, who haunted the moors, the wild marshes, and made his home in a hell, not hell, but earth. He was spawned in that slime, conceived by a pair of those monsters born of Cain, murderous creatures banished by God, punished forever for the crime of Abel's death. The Almighty drove those demons out, and their exile was bitter. Shut away from men, they split into 1,000 forms of evil, spirits and fiends, goblins, monsters, giants, a brood forever opposing the Lord's will, and again defeated.
At this point, my loyal viewers, we have had our full introduction to Grendel, so we can go ahead and answer number 2 in your packet.
Number 2 is a little bit up to your interpretation, ladies and gentlemen, so you can have a variety of answers for what your first impressions of Grendel are. So from what we've read, how do you feel about this monster? Maybe you are taking the text exactly how it says, so you think that he is evil, a demon and a monster, ugly. What do you picture him to look like? I've showed you some clips from the video and some from history and art, but what do you picture Grendel looking like? They don't tell us exactly. Just ugly is pretty much all that we get. So maybe you picture him differently. Does anybody feel bad for him? They mentioned several times that he's all alone, living in a swamp. He's bothered by these parties, these celebrations in Herit. He's about to do something really bad. But is it because he's so sad and alone? Or is he just an evil guy? Go ahead and put your answer for number 2. Then, when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Herit, wondering what the warriors would do in that hall when their drinking was done. He found them sprawled in sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws. He slipped through the door, and there in the silence snatched up 30 men, smashed them unknowing in their beds, and ran out with their bodies, the blood dripping behind him, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter.
What did Grendel just do? That's right. He came into Herit in the middle of the night, snatched up 30 of Hrothgar's men that were sleeping in Herit, and took them back to his lair and ate them. And that, my friends, is the answer to the first part of number 3. It asks how long this goes on. We'll find that out in the next part of the poem.
At daybreak, with the sun's first light, they saw how well he had worked, and in that gray morning broke their long feast with tears and laments for the dead. Hrothgar, their lord, sat joyless in Herit, a mighty prince mourning the fate of his lost friends and companions, knowing by its tracks that some demon had torn his followers apart. He wept, fearing the beginning might not be the end. And that night Grendel came again, so set on murder that no crime could ever be enough, no savage assault quench his lust for evil. Then each warrior tried to escape him, search for rest in different beds, as far from Herit as they could find, seeing how Grendel hunted when they slept. Distance was safety. The only survivors were those who fled him. Hate had triumphed. So Grendel ruled, fought with the righteous, won against many and won. So Herit stood empty and stayed deserted for years. 12 winters of grief for Hrothgar, king of the Danes. Sorrow heaped at his door by hell-forged hands. His misery leaped the seas, was told and sung in all men's ears, how Grendel's hatred began, how the monster relished his savage war on the Danes, keeping the bloody feud alive, seeking no peace, offering no truce, accepting no settlement, no price in gold or land, and paying the living for one crime only with another. No one waited for reparation from his plundering claws. The shadow of death hunted in the darkness, stalked Hrothgar's warriors, old and young, lying in waiting, hidden in mist, invisibly following them from the edge of the marsh, always there, unseen. The mankind's enemy continued his crimes, killing as often as he could, coming alone, bloodthirsty and horrible. Though he lived in Heorot when the night hid him, he never dared to touch King Hrothgar's glorious throne, protected by God, God whose love Grendel could not know.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have here today, but stay tuned for another episode next week. You should have questions 1 through 3 done in your packet, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for a message from our sponsors.
Sunlight travels 93 million miles to turn our grapes into sun-made raisins, and that's all we put in. Grapes and sunshine. Sun-made raisins. Nothing but grapes and sunshine.